Hello, I'm Ted Gunderson. I'm the former head of the FBI in Southern California. For the last 16 years, I've been involved in extensive research and on-the-street investigations involving a number of subjects, such as corruption, illegal dope operations, child abuse, ritual abuse, child kidnapping, child pornography, and related matters. I'm here in Southern California today. It is December the 14th, 1995, and with me is Brice Taylor. Brice Taylor wrote a book recently, and Brice, would you hold your book up and let's take a look at it?
Ted.
Go ahead. Talk a little bit about your book.
Well, my book is entitled Starshine, One Woman's Valiant Escape from Mind Control. And it's a book that I wrote in an effort to expose what's been going on.
And you were born when?
I was born on January 20th, which is Inauguration Day in 1951.
And is there any significance to that?
I believe there is that in the future I was used with presidents as a mind-controlled sex slave, and also used as an espionage, extracting information from high-level officials around the world in order to feed the information back to a powerful group of people who are attempting to control the world.
Okay, let's go back and start just very briefly in your childhood, and tell us if you feel, in looking back now, that there was a master plan for you and for your life, or if you just kind of fell into this by accident.
I believe there was a master plan. I believe that my father involved me in pornography and prostitution as a child. I was abused sexually, physically, ritually, tortured pretty much every day of my life. And my father did that, I believe, intentionally to create within me multiple personality disorder, which is now called dissociative identities disorder, in order that I would be under mind control so that I could be used without my own knowledge and consent, thereby bringing top security to whoever would use me, because I wouldn't be able to tell. And I also was able, they used me as an unpaid slave labor force, which, because there's such a large market for pornography and prostitution, the money that was brought in was also used for this powerful group of people that was doing this. And there were a lot of people that were hurt. A lot of children are still being hurt, and that's why I'm speaking out.
Now, you said from your childhood on, what age did you believe this began?
I was abused from the time I was born. I was...
Who abused you?
My father and my mother, but it was more my father and more under the direction of my father.
Now, are you saying your father's tied into this powerful group of people?
I don't believe that he is tied in to the powerful group of people. However, I believe he was used. They used him. My father also has multiple personality disorder, and I believe that they used him in order to use me, just as a tool.
Well, I mean, how could they use him without his knowledge or without his approval?
I believe that my father was a pedophile, and I believe through his perversion that he may have been found out. Like, they may have found him putting pornography through the mail, and so he may have been prosecuted or found out, and so they were able to just step in and take over at that point because of his corruption.
Have you ever discussed this with your father?
Yes, I have.
And what did he say?
And he said that, as many perpetrators have said to lots of other people, that it never happened, and that I just have a very large imagination.
Then how do you know he's not telling the truth, that you don't have this imagination?
Well, I believe that I have a very sound mind, and I don't believe that if I did have a good imagination that I would have created something this horrific. It's a nightmare.
Go ahead.
It's not something that one would want to create in their imagination.
Well, do you have other people that you know of who've been involved in this, that would document what you're saying?
Yes. Actually, when I began remembering, I had an accident in 1985 where my head smashed the windshield of the car. And I believe that head trauma created a barrier where I could access both lobes of my brain. And due to that, I started having memory flashes. And I was in therapy to handle, I couldn't figure out what was going on. I thought I was crazy myself until after about 3 years of therapy every day, I was able to put together all of this. It all fit together. All these pieces of the puzzle fit together. And although I couldn't still understand why or what this all meant, I realized that I had been ritually abused, that I had been used in child prostitution and child pornography, and that I was having memories of being flown around in helicopters at night into large hotels in Los Angeles where I was dressed in evening gowns, my hair was done, my makeup was done, I was put jewels they put on me, and then I would be shuffled in and prostituted to different people. And I believe that that basically at that point I didn't have anyone to validate what I was remembering, but I went to a conference, an incest conference in New Jersey, and there was a woman there who spoke about ritual abuse. And at that point, I had a name now for what all these memories were that I had been remembering, that there was something that was organized, and there was a reason for it. It was intentional. It wasn't just some crazy religious people who were Satanists that were just doing this. It was intentionally created trauma in order to put people under mind control. And so then, as I continued documenting things and got a little closer to what actually happened, I had another accident that was the same date as the previous one. It was on April 12th, and this one was in 1987, and I broke my back and smashed my face. And I had more floods of memories, and more pieces of the puzzle came in. And as I continued documenting and started having people who didn't necessarily know exactly what I was talking about, but I had therapists who were willing to listen and just to be with me while I put this together. They didn't know any more than I did what was going on. They supported me, and I began to realize that this was really something organized. And as I began having pieces of memory of being used in political things, with a lot of people that had a lot of money, that was at the point where my life was threatened, and I had to flee from California and my family, and I went to the island of Kauai. And once I got into a safe place, my therapist had someone that she knew there, and I went and stayed with them. And once I was in a safe place, I began having memories of top government officials and
Involved in this?
Involved in
What
this.
year would that have been?
With the top government officials?
Well, that you started remembering that. You went
That
to
was
escape.
in 1991. In
91 you
April of
escaped?
91, I escaped.
Everything seemed to be happening in April. I mean, the significant dates.
Well, the April 12th date was, I believe, the date that I was programmed to self-destruct. Should I begin remembering? There's very sophisticated programming, Ted, that goes on to ensure that you do not remember. And if you do begin to remember, you're instructed that you will either have migraine headaches, you will have accidents, you will commit suicide. I mean, the list is endless.
Well, who gives you this training?
Usually the parents do, or it's done in preschools. There's people that are called programmers who are very astute with the use of drugs and hypnosis, who I was used as a child. I remembered that some of them were doctors who actually did the programming on me.
Did you go to preschool?
No, I went to a ballet school in Woodland Hills, where I was ritually abused at that school. So I grew up in a system believing that no one was safe. I was prostituted to policemen, and my father got courtesy cards in case he was ever pulled over by a police officer. And so I grew up in a system believing that no one would ever, that everyone was involved and no one would ever help me.
So you had
remember.
you had no security at all.
None.
And now let's go back a little bit and mention a couple of things here. You're talking about mind control. Is that right?
Yes.
And you're talking about hypnosis and shock treatments. And at what age were you when you feel this first started?
Well, like I said before, the abuse started very early on. The drugs, the hypnosis, and the electroshock that was delivered to me in the early years through cattle prods was done by my father and by, like I said, different doctors that lived in our community. And that started out when I was 2, 3, 4, 5 years old.
You can remember that?
Yes, I did. When you develop multiple personality disorder, what happens is that a side effect that goes along with that is that you have a perfect photographic memory. And so when memories come back, it came back with the original smells. I could feel in my body what had happened, so I re-experienced the body sensations, I re-experienced the smells, I could hear the exact words that were said during the time, and everything was just absolutely as a flashback. Like you hear Vietnam veterans will talk often of their flashbacks. They'll just be reliving an event that actually took place. And while I believe that it's very possible that every detail that I remembered may not be 100% accurate, the overall picture in the time that I have taken to document it absolutely fits together in such a persuasive picture that I myself can't deny it.
So when you use the word they, you're meaning you're talking about an organized group?
Yes.
Of which your parents or your father at least was part of?
Yes.
And are you talking about satanic type activities?
Satanic activities, I was satanically abused through a church, a Baptist church that I was taken to at night. There were rituals that took place in rural areas where people were tortured, babies and children were killed.
Sacrificed? Talking about satanic ceremonies?
Absolute satanic ceremonies, of which I was forced to participate as a child and to watch. And there were sex orgies, and all of this, what it does is it creates dissociation in a child. So the child does not remember it because the trauma that you're witnessing is horrific. You cannot, your mind's sane defense is to shut it off, to compartmentalize it, to say this never happened. And it's the way that people who are actually normal deal with trauma.
So what you're saying is a defensive mechanism to shut out the horror, and therefore you don't remember. Although it hasn't actually happened to you, you don't remember it, but you do. When you hit your head, you had flashbacks to it.
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. And up until that time, I thought I was a perfect wife and mother. I thought I had had a perfect childhood. I had no idea where I had been, what I had been used as, and what was going on in my life.
You mentioned you were married.
Yes.
You feel your husband was part of this?
I believe my husband was a part of it. My husband was a victim. We were both victimized together, as our marriage was arranged when we were like 14. We were put together, and we were both traumatized together in order to condition us to be together. He was beaten up, he was electroshocked, he was drugged. We were both hurt together.
You mentioned a multi-generation, I believe. You want to explain what multi-generation is?
Yes. As what ended up happening is that people that have been abused will usually tend to abuse their own children, and it's when they have multiple personality disorder and they're not aware of all of their personalities. A lot of times different personalities will have been trained or programmed to do certain activities. And so my father had been abused satanically, and the way I know that is that his father also satanically abused me. So what happens is that people that have had this sickness in their families are used and targeted because they are perfect people to be used. It's like they see you as trash, throw away, and that now they can turn this around and use the dissociative disorders that people have developed in order to further the programming.
Now, you mentioned they. What you're saying is they use a normal family situation and they're trained. Say the grandfather, the father, the mother, father, and so forth, the mother and the husband and so forth. They're trained into this over a period of generations. Is that right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Now, who could they be that they would have such power over these individuals? What are you talking about?
The network that I have researched and is in my book, explains a lot of it, is that it's intelligence agencies. The Central Intelligence Agency has done mind control experiments on intergenerational families who have been ritually abused. The Masons were involved. They have a huge network where these secrets continue to proliferate. And it's gone into the government where the government officials who participate and cooperate are allowed to go through the channels to elevate to higher positions within the government if they cooperate with the network that's controlling everything. And I believe that I call them the council. There was a group of men who stood head and shoulders above our own government, who used the politicians within the government for furthering their interests globally. They have a plan that they want executed by the year 2000, that they will be in total control and that they will have a global government that they're in charge of. They see themselves as the elite. They feel that they are the intellectual elite, that they're special, and that they see the common people as herds, that they feel that people need to be led, and that they really have no intellectual capabilities of understanding to rule themselves. So they feel that they want to rule the world in this way.
And who are these people? You say you see a council above the political structure.
Right. My experience
You're talking about a worldwide council.
Yes, my experience was that the people that were absolutely giving me instructions that I delivered in an espionage capability to presidents, to different government official, governors, whatever, world leaders, were publicly nameless. I never knew who they were. My instructions came often over remote access television, and I didn't know who was giving me the information, but
Did you see a picture of them?
it was like a scrambled picture and scrambled voices, so I never did actually know
And
who.
where were you when you were shown these pictures?
In a hotel room.
Would they give you an assignment to go to a hotel room
Yes.
at a certain time? Who
Yes.
gave you this assignment?
I was told to go to room 222 in the Holiday Inn in Woodland Hills, and that's where I went into a room, and there was a television monitor, and I would get instructions of where to go, what to do, and I also got instructions over the phone.
Who would give you these instructions that you would follow?
I didn't always know who gave them to me. I was used with some very high-profile politicians within the government who, I don't know if I should name their names, but
Sure, go ahead and name them.
well, I was used very early on as a teenager with Bob Hope. I was a sex slave to Bob Hope. I was prostituted to the then Governor Ronald Reagan in California, and I was prostituted to President Nixon. And Henry Kissinger was involved, and he and Nelson Rockefeller worked together and made up strategies in order to control a lot of these government officials. So they used me, like I would deliver messages to Reagan and to Nixon that I don't even believe that Nixon and Reagan were aware of, as I was instructed to have sex with them and then deliver messages that were meant to influence them along decisions that they would be making, or to plant seeds for future things. And if they cooperated, then they would advance. And if they didn't cooperate, then they wouldn't get the support from the media or from the economic structure. It was a whole structure that if these people cooperated, then they were advanced, and they became famous. They were given projects. They were put in office, and if they didn't, then they were just left aside.
Okay, now, would you be at home and you'd receive these instructions, say a telephone call, and say you'd go to a certain room at the Holiday Inn? Is that how you'd receive your...
Yes, that was how I received some of my instructions. I received a lot over the telephone.
And you didn't know who was calling you?
I didn't know who was calling me, and I was programmed to not even be able to think. So consciously, I had no awareness that I was anything other than a normal housewife, student, whatever I was at the time. And then I would dissociate into a different personality to receive the instructions.
Well, how would you know that the person that called you was legitimate?
I had no ability to think or question it.
Well, couldn't I just call you and say, this is a person you don't know, I want you to go to room such and such at the Holiday Inn, Woodland Hills? Would you do that?
And if you knew how my programming operated, you would have been able to do that. And I was put into situations like that over and over where I was used in counter-espionage, because people that understood about mind control slaves would get a hold of the information, and they would use you against the people who owned you. And I had no ability to think or question. I did as I was told.
Would they give you a keyword or what?
Yes, there were keywords that were used. Sometimes in the beginning it was keywords and phrases. Then they used numbers, and now the level of sophistication of programming is so sophisticated that they can actually just push a tone on the phone, on a telephone, and the tones are tapped into hypnotic commands that you've been given, so that you know exactly what your instructions are.
Do you remember some of the keywords for you? Or if I gave them to you now, would you go run to a room 222 at the Holiday Inn?
No longer I would, because I have been deprogrammed, and I would be very reticent to give out what my keys, codes, and triggers are, because they may also be other people who are under mind controls too, and I wouldn't want to give that information
So if you
out.
gave them here on the camera right now and people are watching this, it could trigger them, is that what you're saying?
Yes, it could. There are some very specific general words that are used in everyday language that control a whole lot of people who are under mind control.
And you're saying that this mind control began when you were a young child then?
Yes. And the level of sophistication for that mind control escalated as the technology emerged to new levels.
I want to go back more on this council. You're talking about the council. Do you have any idea who that is? Or these would be very powerful individuals.
I
mean, that they would give you instructions to pass on to the President of the United States or the Governor of California. I mean...
Because I was an intermediary, I was safe, I was secure. No one who would ever suspect someone that looks like this to be doing government espionage work. I called them the Council Five. I really don't know who they are. I just know that they are the men who literally own the international banking right now. They are the wealthiest men on the planet.
And you don't know their names?
I do not know their names.
Are you talking about international bank? Are you talking about the Federal Reserve?
Federal Reserve was a small faction in our country of it. They set up a world banking system that has already been put in place, that they had set up pre-planned for the New World Order. And so this world banking system was set in place, and they have everything to fund it. They have the largest corporations. They have the world leaders. The whole plan is in pretty much set.
What are the countries? In other words, you have Americans involved and you have Europeans involved?
Yes.
And
Yes.
tell me who they are. Tell me what countries they're from.
Personally, I would say that most of the major European countries are involved. I don't think that there's any country that's significant with assets that is not involved. They wouldn't. They needed everything to be together.
Well, now, you're aware of the false memory syndrome.
Yes, I am.
Would you explain that and tell me why you think you're not a victim of the false memory syndrome?
Yes. I believe that, first of all, I don't think there is any such thing as the false memory syndrome. I think that it's a group of people who are very intent on containing this so that their plan can go to full fruition.
Without interruption from people
Without
like
any
you.
kind of interruption. And of
And
course,
me.
what I say sounds absolutely ludicrous, and that's what they're counting on. They are absolutely counting on my telling this story that they didn't believe that I would ever be able to remember. But I personally believe in God, and I believe that God has led me to the right people for the support that I needed to get through this. And I believe that that due to that their plan is going to fall apart. But they absolutely have started a whole network that it was meant to contain this. It's called the False Memory Foundation, and I also believe...
It's an organization.
Yes, I also believe that the parents whose children are coming forward and saying, I remember you ritually abusing me, and when the parents say that they can't remember or they're confused, I have compassion for them. In many ways, I believe that had I not smashed my head into my car and had my memories, that I might well be one of those parents one day who my children came back and said, you know, what happened? I remember all this. How come you did this? And I believe that smashing my head was a blessing. And I think that these parents who don't understand may themselves be victims of ritual abuse, or else they are absolutely convinced that they want to gain money and power from supporting this network. I really have a hard time believing that people are that evil. I don't know.
Were these two accidents that occurred in April, each of these years, few years apart, were those accidents, or you think someone was trying to harm you?
Usually when sex slaves have outrun their time, when you become older and they don't want you anymore, it's called being thrown off the train. And people, usually that happens at around age 29 for women. I was used longer, I think, because I had extensive mind files, and I was used in that way because I was what was called polyfragmented. I was multiple personality disordered to the max, to the ultimate damage, and so my capability of being used and being secure so that no one plus myself would know was pretty much guaranteed because I was so damaged. So I think at that point that usually they kill you. And they don't need to kill you because you kill yourself. You're triggered to have an accident, or you're triggered to, a lot of women commit suicide. They self-inflict wounds, and they don't know why they're doing it. And they self-destruct, and that's exactly how it's planned. It's planned that your time's over, you self-destruct, and oh my gosh, this is what happened, you know. This woman just killed herself. She's mentally unstable, and so it just is kept hidden that way.
So the first accident, that particular April, you're supposed to die, and you didn't, so they did it again a couple years later?
And I really don't have an answer. I don't have the exact reason for why that occurred, but I do, since I was threatened the last time, during that time when whatever they were trying to do, whether it was they were trying to kill me or whether it was just a threat to keep me quiet and scare me away. I really don't have that answer.
At this point in your life, were you talking then publicly, or
I was talking publicly, and I wasn't integrated enough to really even be afraid. I was unable to protect myself, but in that endeavor, I traveled around the country writing my book, and I met with other women who have been similarly abused, and was absolutely couldn't even believe the validation that we were able to support each other in the reality of what had happened to us. So that was
Brice,
very eye-opening.
Yeah, Brice, I have a little bit of a problem playing the devil's advocate. I have a problem with these very powerful people, way above, even above the politicians, ruling the world, and yet it comes all the way back down to where your father programmed you. Can you explain that? I mean, that's unbelievable. So, and also, if you're a victim of this, how many other people are victims, and how well organized are they?
I think there's a lot of people that have been victims. I think the answer lies, I believe my father was connected to the mafia. I don't believe that the mob even knew how big this was. I know I've talked to certain mafia people now who can't even believe it, and they want to help because they believe it's terrible too. They want to do everything they can to stop it. I believe that it goes back to, I've researched, it goes back to the Illuminati, and it's not something that just started this generation. This is hundreds of years in the planning. It's not something new, and I believe that people like my father fit into the plan of being this so much garbage that they could use as a tool for their plan.
Explain the Illuminati. What is the Illuminati?
The Illuminati is a group of people who are really, I'd just say they're kind of like the mob, only it's very high level, and they are very sophisticated use of mind control. They know all the aspects of it, and they're very well connected with wanting to gain power.
Do you know when the Illuminati was first organized?
I can't really recall all the history on that right now.
Do you remember who organized it?
No.
Do you remember where it was organized?
I believe it was organized in Europe originally.
Okay, and so you're saying that possibly several hundred years ago, it was organized. Do you know what they did in the way of organizing?
I think that they started putting out all kinds of different information. A lot of it now comes out as the New Age philosophy. I think that as much as we would all like world peace and harmony around the world, I think that a lot of that has been filtered down in a way that is made to look like it's for humankind benefit, that actually is going to just work into their plan. I wish I could be more clear on this. I think that there's, like Blavatsky, there's been a lot of people who were used to put out all kinds of different philosophies that could be used along these lines, and I really haven't done all my homework on all of this, so I don't know all the answers.
So you're saying that some of these philosophies advocated by the Illuminati it would appear to be for the betterment of mankind, and they're using this as a cover in order to further their cause?
Yes.
Like, for example, give me an example.
The philosophy of how wonderful it would be to have a global community where everyone was harmoniously living, and it was all peace, and we were living under one rule or whatever. I believe that in America, our forefathers set this constitutional republic that we have up with very specific rules and guidelines, knowing that that this constitutional republic would only survive if we had certain spiritual beliefs in God that would back this up. I believe that this global harmony, peace, is not set upon those principles of God. It's not set upon the principles of people under law ruling themselves. I think it's more of a dictatorship, and I think that it's going to look like peace, and it's going to not be that way in the end.
Are you talking about United Nations?
I believe the United Nations was used as an organization that was able to work internationally, and I think that there was a specific group of people who worked through the United Nations that used that organization to further their interests that had nothing to do with what the United Nations was purporting publicly to do.
And what about records? They must have some records someplace, don't they? I mean, if you have an organization of this type, you're talking about a mass conspiracy.
Right, and as far as the records, I've heard all kinds of different information. There was a computer system that survivors have reported. It's called Janus. It's in Washington, D.C. It has unlimited information on people.
Where is it housed?
It's housed in Washington, D.C.
I know, where in Washington?
I don't know.
Who told you about this?
There were two survivors that I interviewed, and I keep their anonymity because people are afraid.
Now, you mentioned early that as a result of these traumatic situations, you ended up having a photographic memory.
Yes.
This works against them then, doesn't it?
It does, but they never thought that I would be able to access my own memory. I think that they hadn't really perfected the technology quite as much in my generation as unfortunately I believe that they have with future generation. With the generation right now, I think there's a group of children who have been abused and programmed in daycare centers all over the country and internationally, whose level of sophistication of programming is way surpassed the way I was programmed. And I think that they didn't expect that I would be able to remember, but when I did, I remembered as if it was happening today. I mean, I was able to see it, smell it, taste it, hear it.
Are there other survivors like you that would fall in this category?
Yes, there's a lot of other survivors.
With these photographic memories?
Yes.
And how do they discredit you? They certainly must be attempting to discredit you.
They say that it's false memory. They say that you're crazy. They say that you're just, sexually hallucinating, or that you're having sexual fantasies, or there's every amount of discredit. People are discredited every day in the media. Unfortunately, people that have been victimized are continually victimized through being discredited publicly when they come forward. When they finally muster the courage to come forward, then they're discredited by the media, who is usually connected into this and trying to contain it.
Now that brings up another subject. You mean to tell me that the media is involved in this, enabling to perpetuate this gigantic cover-up?
Yes, they own the major networks.
They being?
These men that are publicly the elite. The name I do
Nameless.
not know I do not know who they are, but they are the elite.
You talking about the big bankers?
I think it goes way beyond bankers. I think it goes to a certain number of select elite families, and I don't know what their names are.
I've heard some of these names, but I don't want to plant it in your mind.
Well, I know that I had some very specific memories about the Rockefeller family.
What about the Rockefeller family?
I had memories of being used at parties that Nelson Rockefeller gave at Christmas time in New York, where top politicians, top entertainers were invited to his home. They had secret meetings after the party. It was all very secluded, and they believed that I wouldn't remember, and I was usually used pre-programmed to deliver messages after sex to two different politicians or whoever it was that they wanted to influence at these parties. And so I believe Nelson Rockefeller was heavily involved.
Well, now you say you were pre-programmed. Nelson Rockefeller didn't tell you to come to the party, did he?
Yes.
Well, he did?
I was...
or was this one of those through the telephone? Or?
It was through the telephone. And I had very specific times of sitting with Nelson Rockefeller at times when he actually was the one telling me what to tell other people.
And how many occasions?
Gosh, I probably have memories of probably 4 very specific times.
And what age were you at this time?
It was during the time I was in my late teens and my early 20s. That was when I was used the most, because naturally that would have been the time when I was physically the most attractive.
You know, well, you're very pretty now, so you must have
Well,
been...
I've been through a lot, and I feel
You must
like...
have been very pretty then, too, of course.
Well, I was programmed to maintain a certain weight. I was programmed to be a perfect size 6. I don't think that people realize how powerful our brains are and how we can impact everything that a lot of the things that happen to us, even physically, with the power of our own minds.
Well, now, at what stage was there separation between you and your family? In other words, your family was used in the initial indoctrination, your preschool experiences, sexual molestation, ritual abuse, and so forth. Now, was there an age or a period in your life where all of a sudden you left your family and went on to bigger and better things?
When I was 16 years old, I remember, and I was being used with Bob Hope quite a bit at that time in Palm Springs. I remember my father coming into my room at night and kneeling down at my bed and crying and saying, "Honey, big things are happening and I've lost control of you." And at the time I didn't have the ability to think or to question or to understand because I was under mind control. But about 6 months after that, my father was taken to UCLA and he had brain surgery. And I believe that from then on my father was no longer in charge of anything. And I had the feeling unconsciously that I was out of control, that no one was in charge of me, that, you know, I could be used at any time, and it was very frightening, unconsciously.
Are you telling me that they actually took your father in and did brain surgery on him so he would be inoperative or ineffective?
I don't know what they did to my father. All I know is that my father had brain surgery, and that from then on he was no longer at home. I mean, he was not there. He was just not.
Lobotomy or what?
It was something similar to that, but they didn't need to do lobotomies any longer. They did something to him, I believe.
What about your mother? Did she know about this? Or did your father have a sickness that would cause him to go to the hospital? Or did they just tell him to go to the hospital?
My dad always had pain. He had a neck injury during the war when he was working in the shipyard, and he had a torticollis of the neck. And so they told him that they could deaden a nerve so that he would stop having pain. And they gave him brain surgery. And I don't know, but I suspect that something happened while he was there.
Did you ever discuss this with your mother? In other words, did your mother suspect it also, or did she just cast it aside?
No, my mother has been under mind control also, and my mother is a good person consciously. She has been very controlled, and when I began remembering and confronting her, she would just start crying, and she would say, I don't remember it. It's not that I don't believe you. I just can't remember anything." And she would cry, and she was very upset. It was awful to watch that. I hated my mother for a long time while I was getting my memories, because I didn't understand why she would participate in hurting me. But after I was able to go through the healing process, I understood exactly why my mother hurt me and why she did what she did, because she was programmed to do that. And I believe that she didn't have a choice.
Did you ever fill out an application, say, in your life, I was born at a certain time, parents were this, address this, that you feel went into this Janus? Is that what it is?
Uh-huh.
Janus machine?
Not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of, but I believe that the people that were in the mind control projects have been probably kept very, very concise records of, and because it was seen as research. They did all kinds of studies on people.
After World War II, before World War II, after the Korean War? What period?
After World War II, the Nazi scientists were brought to our country. A woman by the name of Linda Hunt wrote a book called Project Paperclip, in which she documented how the Nazi scientists, many of them were given immunity, brought to our country. They were plugged into the major universities, and they continued doing their research. Well, they had already accumulated lots of data about mind control through what they had, through the horrors in the concentration camps. Those people were studied. And so they basically continued their research in our country under the protection of our universities. And I believe...
And the government probably?
Yes. And, the government...
And the U.S. government?
Yeah, and the government funded it. And I believe a lot of the funding came from covert operations such as drugs, illegal drug, and then the money laundering and the child pornography and prostitution. All these horrific things that were done to people without their awareness just continued to fund their research.
Have you ever met any of these German scientists?
No.
Why do you say that you think this is so?
Just
from reading books?
From reading books that just kind of makes sense. It kind of fills in some of the gaps, and it makes sense. And if people take the time to read what others have spent hours researching, then the picture fills in.
You mentioned Rockefellers. Any other names? We're talking about above the political field, like the presidents and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, you're saying these presidents are used as pawns.
Yes. I believe Bob Hope was very influential and sometimes had power over the presidents. However, I really don't know how that worked. I just watched as a lot of these people waited for opportunities for people that were talented, were in public position, or had money to compromise themselves through their own perversions, through drug use, through people that were pedophiles. Whatever their perversions were, they would manipulate them to get the perfect opportunity to blackmail them. And then once that occurred, they had their use. They could totally use these people.
But the people that they would manipulate in order to blackmail had to be people who were in a position of importance, so to speak.
Yes.
It wouldn't be some fellows fixing the plumbing or doing the electrical.
No, they didn't bother with people who weren't powerful and influential or had money, intelligence.
And you'd mentioned the universities. You feel universities were involved also?
I believe the universities were involved. I believe that military installations were involved. I believe that they used equipment from NASA that in the mind control research. I think a lot of it's been hidden from the American public, and I think the American people have a right to know.
Well, what about U.S. intelligence communities, like the FBI, CIA, military intelligence?
I believe the CIA was used heavily.
You believe this, or you know this?
I believe this.
You don't have any documentation?
All I know is that men in suits were continually accessing me, hurting my children, torturing all of us in order to keep me under control.
Why do you think that they were CIA then? Or
well, they were Secret Service agents when I was used with presidents, and I believe they were CIA because there was a lot of espionage. And I have met other people who are Central Intelligence officers who knew that some of this was going on but had no idea that women and children were being hurt. They didn't know the whole story. They just knew little bits and pieces of it. And so people have gone on the record to explain this. People are concerned. People that didn't really know everything that was going on.
you mentioned Rockefeller. Any other prominent families that you can recall? How about prominent families overseas?
I think that there were royalty, English royalty.
You think or you know?
I know.
How do you know?
I was used as a prostitute to Prince Philip and to Prince Charles. And
When?
The late 70s.
Did you travel overseas? And you traveled overseas?
Yes, I was taken out of the country a lot with Henry Kissinger during the Nixon administration, and Henry Kissinger used what he called mind files, which you can actually program a person. They had developed the technology to program a person to remember extensive amounts of documents, all kinds of information, political information, and I was used the Trilateral Commission and the CFR, a lot of the organizations that he was involved, Henry Kissinger was involved with. I would accompany him and was seen as a secretary or an aide, and he would access my mind files in order to extract information, and he had different ways of doing that. He would look at his watch and say, oh, it's 1 o'clock, to access certain material out of my mind file so that people wouldn't know what he was doing.
Can I access material out of your mind files now?
No.
Why?
Well, first of all, I believe that I don't have access any longer, or at least at this point I don't have access to that because I've been deprogrammed. There may be somebody here that's a deprogrammer who can help me get to that, but so far I haven't been able to get any deeper into that.
Are you telling me that you had access to the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral files and you memorized that?
No, I had access to, when I was in my late teens, early and late teens, I was taken to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. I was taken into the Federal Reserve. I was exposed to lots of documents that Henry Kissinger would need the exact wording to when he would be making some of his deals. He was an expert strategist. He was perfect at manipulating people and coming up with strategies in order to be able to write out these legal documents. And so he was able, instead of having to take a lot of books and do a lot of research, he had everything all organized inside of my mind that he could access at any time that he wanted to.
So so you went into the...
I went with Henry Kissinger. I have memories of going into Russia and into England.
But, I mean, to get this information, you went to the Library of Congress or what?
Yeah, I had a note that I gave to a woman at a desk that said, I guess, to let me into a certain room, and this lady took me into the room, and I was told to just look at file after file, and I was given hypnotic suggestions that I would remember everything that I saw, and I was told that I was to like look at a document and like take a picture of it with my mind. And so I did that, and later on when someone would access that document, I could actually bring the picture of it up into my mind and read it from the hypnotic photographic memory that I had.
So, how did the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral, are these the people you're talking about when you say they?
I believe there's a group of people within those organizations that are working towards this New World Order.
Do you know the Council on Foreign Relations? Do you know people in there yourself?
No, only Henry Kissinger.
He's the only. Have you ever seen a membership list of the Council on Foreign Relations?
I have seen it, and there are some people that I remembered seeing, but Henry Kissinger was the main person.
And how about the Trilateral Commission?
And those are foggy memories, but I know I was used a lot with Henry Kissinger during that time.
Have you ever heard of the Bilderbergers?
I've heard of them, however, I don't have any personal experience with them.
So, in addition to Henry Kissinger traveling with him, did he use you as a sex slave?
No, Henry Kissinger never used me as a sex slave at all, ever. From what I understood from deprogramming is that a person couldn't be used with mind files and as a sex slave at the same time, or just for some reason the brain can't work that way. And so if I was being used for my mind file capabilities, I had to be used only for that. And then later on, if they wanted to use me with someone as a sex slave, I would be used for that. But never was used with Henry Kissinger.
How old were you first used? How were you first used, and how old were you when you were first used versus a sex slave or a mind control?
I began with a high-level sex slave with more important people as a teenager when I was like 16.
And then at what stage did you discontinue being a sex slave and become the person that could memorize these documents?
No, actually the memorization of the documents started in like my high school years, and it was during the Nixon administration, and so I was used for both. I was used a lot for both the sex slave and the mind files, but not at the same time.
Oh, so in other words, one week they'd use you for sex slave, and the next week they'd use you for mind.
Or in the morning they'd use me for mind files, and at night I'd be used as a sex slave.
So it wasn't over periods of weeks or days. It was
time.
Could be hours. Could be
hours.
Okay. And who would make the decision as to whether or not you were used one way or the other?
I believe that Henry Kissinger and Bob Hope were the main people in charge of how I was used. And I had a lot of memories of being used sitting in between Henry Kissinger and Nelson Rockefeller in a limo. I was used extensively in limousines, where I was either doing sex with different politicians or entertainers or whatever. But during this time with Rockefeller and Kissinger, they would be strategizing on different people that they wanted to influence. And so they would have me in the back of the limousine, and they'd be putting in different things that they wanted me to say to people. And sometimes it would be like to foreign leaders, and they would even have people who could speak the foreign language who would tell me, when I was in a hypnotic trance, what to say in a foreign language to deliver this message to someone after I'd had sex with them. And so they had researched exactly what the person that was, they called it targeting a person. And whoever the targeted person was, they knew exactly what their likes and dislikes were, even down to what kind of perfumes they liked, or what kind of sex they liked, or what attitudes I was to behold, or whatever. They had done their homework, and they knew exactly the stance to take to influence these people.
Name some of these foreign dignitaries
that I
targeted, that you had sex with.
Yeah, Prince Charles and Prince Philip and
others?
Yeah, there were some others. There were some other foreign ambassadors and Mexican officials, and
you don't want to name them.
Yeah, I don't want to. I just get scared.
Yeah, you don't want to name them. Okay. And what kind of messages would you pass on to them?
The messages were along the lines of giving them a suggestion about like different attitudes. I mean, they were all different, but like with Nixon one time, an example would be that they wanted to send some troops into a certain area, and so they used me to like try to persuade Nixon that it would be the American thing to do, to send the troops in and to say that we were helping to further peace and freedom, and that we were a great nation, and along those lines, in order that that a president would be influenced, or a leader.
So they used sex, so they put you next to Nixon so you could influence some of his foreign policies. Is that what you're saying? And you mean a man like that would have sex and it would influence him just from somebody that he had sex with?
Well, I would have sex with him, and then I would deliver this message that they had pre-programmed me to say. And the messages were very clever. I mean, it's like there were times when Reagan would say, "I don't know how you know all this stuff, or you're so smart or something, for you're such a young age." And it wasn't that I was smart. It was just that the people that were programming me had done their research and their homework, and they knew exactly what to say and how to say it. And I was given clever sayings. I was given jokes. I sang songs. I did whatever. I was like a little entertainment center. And so it was like having a toy. And it went a long way, I guess, to influencing.
Well, didn't Nixon and Reagan realize that you were a part of the program, that you were influencing
I don't
them?
believe that they did. I don't believe that they knew. I think that they were naively thinking that, you know, they were being given a gift, or that it was their right to use. I heard the attitude that it was that the presidents had a right to having whatever it was that would help them do their job better. And if it was to relieve stress, I gave foot massages, I gave back massages. You know, I did whatever was necessary in order to relieve them of stress or whatever. When Watergate happened, Nixon was severely depressed. And, you know, it was my job to help him be happy, and he sometimes relied on that, knowing that when I came in that he would feel better. And since then I talked to a man who's written a book in 1978. His name is Walter Bauer. It was called Operation Mind Control, and he personally knows Nixon's psychiatrist, and told me that Nixon was severely depressed, and it was everything that I remembered. It validated my memory about that.
So you have to go in the White House to do these things?
Usually it was at places where the president was taken. It was the Western White House was here in California, or like with Reagan, I was taken to his ranch in California, and it wasn't, you know, I would be used in closer proximity to my home in California. But then I was also taken at times, as a teenager in Washington, D.C., they had a limo loop where politicians could get into the limo at lunch and have oral sex with a sex slave. And it was just seen as a service. And I think that these guys were paid off in whatever it was that turned them on, and they used slaves. And I was not the only one. There were other women who have also been used.
And who are some of these other politicians?
Kennedy was
Jack
Ted
or Ted?
Kennedy. Ted Kennedy was a major perpetrator of sexual abuse to me. He was very violent.
In what way?
He would slap me, beat me, tie me up. I mean, he was brutal. He was brutal. There were.
Would he have normal sex with you, or after he beat you up, or?
Well, he would have. I don't call that normal sex. I call that brutal sex, violent sex.
But I mean, would he?
He would have sex with me.
It'd
yes.
be like heterosexual sex.
Yes,
Okay.
and there were times at different galas or, you know, political meetings where these guys knew who the sex slaves were, and they would always be trying to get us off into a corner, into another room or somewhere to have sex.
Who are these
with us.
guys?
Ted Kennedy, a lot of the different politicians.
Name the other politicians that were involved.
Yeah.
Just name the ones who you say you've had were used as a sex slave for.
Okay, Ted Kennedy, Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan. I'm trying to think of
Any
these
other
guys.
presidents?
Yes. I was used with Lyndon Johnson a couple times at his ranch in Texas. I was used with a lot of celebrities.
Just go back to the presidents. Finish up the presidents.
I was used. I was never used with Jimmy Carter. I was used with Ford. He was also violent, and he was also connected to Bob Hope. and that was usually in Palm Springs on the golf course with Bob Hope.
You mean they
Or
did this on
after-
the golf course?
No, it was after they would play a round of golf.
Mm.
And Bob often shared me with a lot of his political friends in Palm Springs. Yeah, so that was about it with the presidents.
You left out one of the presidents, didn't you?
Reagan, Nixon, Ford, and not Carter.
Not Carter.
Not Carter.
How about Bush?
Oh, George Bush, when Reagan was president of the United States and George Bush was vice president, George Bush is a pedophile, and my daughter was also raised in the project, which is called Project Monarch, and my daughter was trained to be a sex slave, presidential model, and she was abused by George Bush as a child when she was like 3 years old.
And were you a sex slave to George Bush yourself?
No, I never was.
But he did with your daughter then?
Yes. And I have since met other women who have children with the same exact name who are also abused as children by George Bush.
Same exact name as your daughter?
Yes, my daughter.
That name is Kelly?
Kelly.
And how about Clinton, Bill Clinton?
Bill Clinton also had sex with my daughter.
Did Clinton have sex with
And
you?
it was just before he was elected president. Yes.
And with you also?
Yes.
How
We
about
were
Bill?
often used as a sex team together. We were trained as a sex team and were used with certain people who enjoyed that kind of sex.
I mean, first the child and then the
Or,
parent?
no, both together. Mother and daughter sex team.
Oh, I see. And how about Hillary?
No, I never had anything to do with Hillary.
How about some of the other presidents' wives, a lesbian relationship? You know anything about that?
I've heard from other people that have been abused in the project that are sex slaves that Hillary Clinton is a lesbian, and I have heard from their reports that they were abused by her, but as far as sex with any of the other presidents' wives, I don't know. I have no knowledge of that.
You know anything about Barbara Bush?
All I know is that she just seemed like the nice grandmotherly type, and I don't know anything about her.
Okay, let's come back, let's come down one more level. Let's say, how about U.S. senators, congressmen?
There were some, and right now, for whatever reason, I can't remember their names, but there were different, I can't remember the names, but there were different people that I was used with at that level.
How many?
I don't know.
A dozen? 2 dozen?
Probably a lot.
50?
A lot. Probably. I mean, it was years that I was used this way, and I wasn't supposed to ever know or remember their names. So, a lot of times the memories came without faces and weren't as vivid as some of the other ones. But I know that there were.
Say 50 of them, would you say?
I wouldn't be surprised.
And you're talking about congressmen and senators.
Mm-hmm.
And what about governors?
Governors, I was used with Reagan when he was a governor. I was used to deliver message to other California governors. I was used with Pete Wilson before he was a senator in California. I was used with Pete Wilson way before he was governor. They were planning on using him possibly in the future as for president, grooming him along those lines. And I had a lot of different times I was used with him in Catalina Island, where I would deliver messages to him, and I believe that Pete Wilson was very aware of where the messages were coming from, and he was very willing to cooperate, and he wanted to advance and do whatever they said.
Give me an example of the messages you would deliver.
They usually had to do with legislation and
How to vote?
how to vote, who to, turn away from this issue, or, look to this or do that. And there was something that I haven't completely gotten all the answers to that had to do with an educational system that was implemented in California called, I believe it's like Education 2000, that had to do with a certain new way of teaching children. And I think it has to do with a way of teaching children that gets totally away from the basics of what they're supposed to be, what a child needs to learn in order to think for themselves. These systems were designed for children to not think, to just be controlled.
Like getting away from reading, writing, arithmetic, and
Right.
so forth, the basics that have been taught to us for years, year after year.
Exactly.
You mentioned espionage. How would you be used in espionage?
Basically just delivering messages. I wasn't the one planning it, and so I would be sent into someone, and like there were certain corporation heads, presidents that I would be sent into, and in different hotel rooms, and I would be delivering messages to them, or like there were times when I would be used. Either the mafia or the CIA would send me in with different messages. It was extensive. It was messages usually about just influencing someone's attitude about another person, to make them not trust someone, or to make them trust this person, or to vote this person in, or look the other way.
Why would they believe you?
Well, they probably wouldn't necessarily believe me, but if I just reported innocently that I had seen this person do such and such, or, I had witnessed this or heard this, then, it kind of
Indirect
seeds
influence.
a person in their thinking. It's like a thought that's there that always maybe casts a little bit of doubt about something.
So you say the mafia's involved in this too?
Mm-hmm.
How do you know the mafia's involved?
Oh my God. Because, this is scary. Because the mafia was involved. I was used in Las Vegas a lot, and the mafia was involved heavily in Las Vegas.
How were you used in Las Vegas by the mafia?
Um,
And when?
Oh man. Frank Sinatra was one of Bob Hope's friends, and I was used in Las Vegas when I was a teenager and in my early 20s. And basically, I was tortured a lot by the mafia there in order to stay in line, and I think it had to do with keeping me from remembering a lot. It was another
How
form
do you
of
know it was mafia?
I
They certainly wouldn't say I'm mafia. I'm
yeah,
not
I think it's just you kind of know. I think I was around mafia people my whole life, and I don't know. Like Bibi Rebozo was, I consider, was the mafia, and he was President Nixon's best friend, and I have some very specific memories of him, and I just heard, I guess, from being around, just sitting. They would park me in different places, thinking that I was just to be sitting there, kind of, as a vegetable, and I was listening. Parts of me were listening and remembering. So I kind of knew a lot of stuff that they probably thought I wasn't gonna remember.
And what other prominent people? How about ambassadors and United Nations officials?
I don't have any specific recollections of actual names of people in those positions, but...
Do you ever recall going to a restaurant, say in New York City or other locations, where you knew that the booths were wired for video and audio both?
No, but I do remember going to parties in Palm Springs at Bob Hope's house, and different places where I knew that the room was wired, and I knew that people were being compromised. Men would be led to believe that these people, like Bob Hope and everybody, believed that it was okay to be having sex with children, and that it's okay, and the drugs were free, and the alcohol was free, and have it all, and then when the person participated as a pedophile having sex with a child, they were being filmed, and then they owned these people, and they called it having them in their back pocket.
And who were these people? Businessmen?
Mm-hmm. Businessmen, different politicians, wealthy people.
Does the name Richard Armitage mean anything to you?
No.
Did you ever get involved in, say, the missing in action, the POW issue?
No.
You mentioned earlier that you were abused in the Baptist church. How about other religions?
Well, I was abused in the Baptist church, and then later on it was Presbyterian, but I believe that from the reports that I've heard from other women around the country, there's been abuse, ritual abuse in the Catholic Church, in the Mormon Church. It's not just limited to one religion. It's like they just utilize that setting in a lot of different religions.
You said you heard from other women around the country, other sex slaves?
Yes.
How many such sex slaves do you know or have you had personal contact with?
Probably about 6.
And you've
that I know personally.
That you've talked to?
That I personally met in person for an extended period of time.
And did you exchange information?
Oh gosh, I probably should say 10. There's probably 10.
Did you exchange information?
Yes.
Are these other women talking?
No. And most of them are very frightened. Most of them are still not integrated. They haven't been able to have the benefit of as much therapy and deprogramming as I have. And they're very scared. And they're very broken people. And they're just trying to maintain. Some of them are homeless. Some are
living on the streets?
Living on the streets.
How would you ever meet somebody living on the street?
I met a woman that was living when I was on the island of Kauai. I know she was from this, and she was homeless. She was terrified. She was afraid even of having a home because she was afraid someone would find her and hurt her if she had a home.
Well, how did you know she was one of these sex slaves?
Because she reported what she had remembered and shared with me, her
to you?
memories.
Why would she open up to you?
Because I was very vocal, and so she felt like I was a person that she could trust. It's like we were like these people that had similar experiences. We were trying to understand what had happened to us.
So you just struck up a conversation with her on the street? Is that what you're saying?
She had been a therapist in the mental health system, and I actually, it was before she was homeless, I actually signed up for a class at her home, and went, and as I was writing and drawing and telling her what had happened to me, she was having her own memories. And then it was probably 6 months through her own process that she became homeless and stopped being able to work. She was incredibly dysfunctional. She couldn't think straight. She couldn't do anything.
Did you ever see money exchanged among these people?
There was, in the earlier days, there were suitcases full of money that was exchanged. Lots for drugs. I was used in money laundering operations. It was always about money. Money was a very central thing, but later on they didn't need to carry money around in suitcases any longer. Imagine it became more sophisticated and was able to be wired and transferred through different accounts.
And how many times did you see money exchanged?
There were drug exchanges. I really couldn't even count the number. It was a lot.
What years would this have been?
The late 60s, early 70s.
And tell me about the exchange of drugs. Somebody would have some drugs in a hotel room or something, and then somebody bring money in and they exchange it?
It was usually larger numbers of drugs, bigger, like lots of drugs. And
did you see the drugs?
And I've seen drugs in briefcases.
And money and drugs at the same place at the same time, and then they just switch suitcases?
And a lot of times cocaine was given as a gift. along with the prostitute. Like I would be given as a gift to someone along with, I would bring cocaine in order to give it to whoever it was that I was being prostituted to. There was a lot of drug money.
Well, it's a wonder with all this prostitution you didn't have any venereal diseases.
Real early on, I was put on a continuous supply of antibiotics by our family doctor, and I was
your family
told,
doctor was involved in it?
Well, I was put on antibiotics from him. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I was told that I had pimples, and I never had pimples. I mean, I didn't have the ability to question that, but they told me I needed to be taking these all the time so I wouldn't have pimples ever. And I never had pimples, but I was always taking antibiotics.
So they were building up your immune system then?
Mm-hmm.
Well, will that prevent you from having a venereal disease?
I believe that it did prevent me from having a venereal disease. I never did have any.
Never did
I've
have
been
one?
Tested. I don't have any.
And how'd your husband fit into this picture? Did he just go along with the program,
Well,
or was
he
he
had
aware of
been
it?
abused. We had been conditioned over the years where, like, we would go and park like a normal teenage couple would, and he would start kissing me, and someone would pull the door open in the car and pull him out and beat him up in front of me, so I believed that he was totally incapable of helping me, and then they would rape me in front of him. And so the two of us were conditioned that way, and I believe he learned to dissociate along those lines, and later to even take me to be prostituted to people. On our honeymoon, I was prostituted to Don Ho.
Who's Don Ho?
Don Ho is a Hawaiian entertainer.
Mm.
My father paid for us to go to Hawaii on our honeymoon, and we went to the Don Ho show, and after the show, Craig took me back to Don Ho's back private room, and Don Ho said, are you going to hand your wife over to me? Real easy like, and Don Ho was drunk, and that's exactly what happened. And then Don Ho told me he wanted me to struggle like it was a rape, and he was disgusting. And so that was my honeymoon.
Nice honeymoon, huh?
Nice honeymoon.
What other actors and prominent people were used?
There's a whole list. I've got it all written down. But Bob Hope prostituted me to Bing Crosby one night, wrapped me up with a big bow and put me in a closet, and with a card saying that I was like a prostitute doll, and that I didn't come with clothes. He'd have to wrap me in a raincoat to take me out, and that he told him the ways to access me, by which physical places to touch me, to turn me on, to just like I was a doll. And I was taken to parties with Bob Hope where I was prostituted by Dean Martin. There was group sex orgies. I was prostituted as a very young teenager to Sammy Davis Jr. at the theater in the Round in Woodland Hills. It was a big theater at the time where actors came. My daughter was prostituted to Mickey Rooney. There were just a lot of those kind of old-time actors who we were both, sometimes me, sometimes both of us together, prostituted to.
How about organizations? Were you used, say, for organizational prostitution?
No, not so much. There were organizations like early on when I was really young, there were a couple of really bad rituals that went on behind the scenes at a Shriner convention. But as far as organizations, it's like it was just the people that operated within organizations. It wasn't so much just.
For example, what organization? Any professional teams, say?
Not really that I know of. It was just
Any professional baseball teams?
Oh, yeah, the Dodgers. Was used at the Dodger Stadium. The Dodgers had an incentive of sex slaves that they were rewarded with if they played well, and they called it the Dodger lineup. And they brought in mind control slaves, women and children, to be in the Dodger lineup. And Tommy Lasorda called, it was the Dodger. We were called the Dodger Diamonds, and so they used a lineup, and if the Dodgers played well, they got to have sex slaves after the game as a reward, and if they didn't, then they had to not have any sex that night. And it was my experience that many of the Dodgers were under mind control themselves, and that they were owned. And I have some really very sad memories of Cindy Garvey and her two daughters being abused in the sex lineup, being very violently abused and hurt. And
By the other
kids were
Dodgers?
little. Yes, by Tommy Lasorda.
Is she a very attractive lady?
Yeah, she's a real pretty blonde.
That's what I
And
thought.
she was used, I have memories of her being used in pornography in Calabasas with her. And it's just, it's bad.
How about O'Malley, the owner?
I don't have any specific memories of him.
How about any universities? Any involvement in the universities?
I have a feeling that USC is somehow connected with the mind control project because my ex-husband went to dental school there, and I was prostituted to different coaches there, although I don't remember anyone's names, and different people within the university that I don't know who they are, but I did have memories of being abused.
What kind of coaches?
Football coaches. So,
What about the, say, like the head coach over there now, Robinson? I think that's his name. So would that mean anything?
I don't know. I don't know, but
John Robinson. Is his name.
yeah, it was pretty bad.
You don't remember that name?
Yeah, I do remember that name.
Okay, would he been one of them? Then?
I don't know.
You don't
I
know?
may not have had all these memories yet.
In other words, you don't know for sure about that.
I don't know for sure.
What about covert operations? Did we cover that when you're talking about espionage?
Well, I think the prostitution and the pornography were covert operations, and I remember as a child being used in Tarzana on Ventura Boulevard at a place called the Corbin Bowl, where they ran, they had child prostitution and pornography, and I was even used, programmed to lure other children off the street that were put into cages and used in pornography and then killed. Sometimes they were used in snuff pornography.
How old were you when this happened?
I was like 6, 7 years old, 8 years old, and they were very painful when I remembered all of that. But I think that's where a lot of these missing children that end up on milk cartons, where they end up going, and I think that they're just lured in and taken off and used, and then they're never seen again.
Over how long a period were you used in this manner?
Well, those specific memories, probably a year. But
When you were 6, 7 years old?
When I was little.
And
in that location.
What location was that again?
That was at the Corbin Bowl. And I believe the Corbin Bowl it's either in Tarzana or Encino. It's
What
on
is that?
Ventura Boulevard.
What
It's
is
a
that?
bowling alley. It was a bowling
bowling
alley, but
alley.
they used some back rooms that they had there.
So the kids would come there to bowl and...
Well, I don't remember anything about really so much the bowling alley, but they were, kids were brought in, like I would be used, there would be a limo on the street, and I would, hey, do you want some candy? And we have a TV in here, you want to come see? And they would get into the limo to look, and that would be the last. The door would be slammed on and they'd be taken away. That was it. And they'd be used in pornography or prostitution, and then they would be killed or whatever they did.
How many instances did this occur with you directly involved?
I had very, very specific memories of a few instances.
A few. What's a few?
3 or 4. I mean, where I got the specific information.
Where you were the one that lured them into the car?
And I was the one that they used to lure into the car.
Did you ever find out what happened to these kids?
I think they were used in snuff porn. As a child, I had endless memories of pornography. It was a normal activity that was done a lot. And a lot of the pornography ended in snuff where the kids that were used were killed. And I think that they killed the ones that were like, I don't know where they got these kids, if they were runaways, or I don't know where they got the children. I don't know, or why they wouldn't be missing from their families. Or maybe they are just the kids that are on milk cartons that were missing, but they would get these kids and use them.
How many such incidents do you recall? Where you witnessed a snuff film?
Years. I can't just say like 1, 2. I don't know, a lot.
But were you using the snuff film yourself as one of the kids?
They would use me like in the pornography, but I wasn't obviously the one that was killed.
No, that's what I mean. But would you be part of the? You'd be part of the film, in other words.
Right, right. And then they would just kill the child that was off the street.
And who were these people that were behind this? The adults.
Men in suits. I never knew who they were. I didn't. I do not. I still to this day don't really know who they were.
Did your father or your parents loan you out to these men in the suits, or did they just say go to the bowling alley and have fun?
It was done under the guise of going to church choir practice. I was even taken out of school. One time during elementary school, I was taken out of like an hour of school to walk to the choir practice that was just right around the corner. And we would do a couple songs, and then it would just be men would come in, and the lady that was a choir director would, she was probably herself under mind control. She would just step aside, and they would start filming pornography.
Of the whole choir?
Of the kids in the choir.
And then would they take you out and use you as a decoy for the kids that they would kidnap?
Well, those memories were related more to the bowling alley. Mm. But sometimes they did bring in dead babies that they used in the snuff films. And they would kill them, and their belief was that if they killed a child in that way, that the power was transferred to them. I mean, they have all these sick, twisted belief systems that they believe that
at the time of death you're talking about.
That the energy is transferred so that then they have the power. That's their incentive for doing this.
Did you have? Did they do these killings within the pentagram or with the satanic type?
No, it was just like pornography. But they had the satanic belief systems. But
how would they kill them?
Sometimes they would kill them by having sex with them to the point that the child would die. They would just die from the trauma, and sometimes they would cut them up. And it was horrific. It was awful. It is living hell. It is horrible.
How much would the film sell for?
I have no idea, but I know that there must have been a big market for them because they sure did a lot of them.
How about the concept of a sex slave? Can you talk about that?
Sex slave is a person that's been trained, sexually abused from childhood. You have personalities. I had different personalities that were trained in all sorts of sex. I was trained to give perfect oral sex. I was trained to be able to perform every kind of sex act like a machine without endless energy, without tiring, and without any needs of my own. It's just like being a machine, basically, where you just do what you're told.
And you were trained yourself. Would they train you with your daughter? Would they train you with other women and children, or what?
I was trained as a child on my own with my father and my brother. My brother was also abused. I have 2 brothers. One of them was used more than another one. And then later on, when my daughter was little, she was trained, and we were trained together. to perform sex on someone. Like she would take the front and I would take the back or whatever, and it's just like being a machine.
Who would give you this training?
I was trained with different prostitutes. I was trained with Playboy bunnies. I was trained in a lot of different times in a lot of different places over the years, different training.
Have you ever been at Hugh Hefner's?
Yes.
Is that where you received some of your training?
Yes. As a teenager, Bob took me there, and Bob Hope, and I received training from Playboy bunnies on different things that I was to do. And I don't know that Hugh Hefner was involved with slaves. I was never abused by him. I don't know what he knew. He may not have known any of it.
Did they ever let you use the facilities for recreational purposes, like the swimming pool or any of that?
Mm-mm.
Strictly for training.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I was being used as a sex slave, I was food and sleep deprived. And so I was never allowed to, if anyone offered me a drink or anything, I would take it, but I knew not to drink it. And Bob would or someone else would take it away from me.
Bob Hope would?
I wasn't allowed to eat. I would go hours without eating. I still have eating problems now where I always have to make sure I have snacks around me because it's frightening to think that I would have to go without food or water again.
Why would they use this technique, deprive you of sleep and food?
It's, I'm not an expert in programming, but it has to do with the fact that when your brain is starved, with the lack of food and water, that it puts you in more of a dissociated state so that you can be used under mind control.
And were you ever abused or taken to military bases?
Yes, I had a lot of memories of being taken as a child. I was put into machinery. I was hung upside down. I was spun in different chambers. They used lights and sound. There was a lot of high-tech equipment that I don't understand what it is, but I know that I went to NASA in Huntsville a couple years ago and experienced sitting in some of those machines that turn you upside down. It was similar type machinery that I was spun, and they know all about brain chemistry, so they knew exactly what to do. I don't know what they were doing, but I felt tortured by what they were doing to me.
And when your father said to you that came to you when you were 16, he started crying, he said he'd lost you. Can you associate that to a particular event or a situation?
I believe that that's when I started being used at a higher level. My grandfather lived in Iowa. He was the mayor of the town and later ran for other political offices. And there was a connection there because I didn't meet my grandparents until I was a teenager. And I believe that as I started meeting my grandparents, and I got connected to a higher level, and I think that the higher the levels that I was approved at, that's when when they just took over.
So when he said that, meaning he passed you on to the next level, and probably your grandparents were involved at that level.
Mm-hmm.
And what town was your grandfather mayor of?
Correctionville, Iowa.
Correctionville?
Correctionville. It's like an hour out of Sioux City.
Would it be east of Sioux City then, I guess?
I don't know.
How about controlled media? What can you tell me about the media?
I believe that the newspapers are, I overheard different places where I was, and they own the media. They own the magazines, they own the newspapers, they owned the television stations. They had a network of people who owned the major networks, and I believe that it's totally controlled now.
How do you know?
That's just what I heard. That's just what I heard.
How'd you hear it? Who told you that?
I think probably, I can't name a specific time when I really got that information. It was an attitude, and I believe that it's so. I can't
Did
really
Bob Hope ever make a statement like that?
I really can't tell you exactly where I got that information.
You put it together in your mind, though, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And how about Project Monarch? You mentioned it earlier.
Right. As I got more integrated and remembered more, I met people from the intelligence community who were attempting to step forward and help with this. And I met a man named Mark Phillips who had information about Project Monarch and knew about the conditioning and programming of other sex slaves around the country. And I believe that there have been a lot of people who have been used at the government level in this project.
And Project Monarch is what?
It's the code name. There was MK Ultra. There were a lot of different projects under different names, and I think there's probably even more sub-projects and sub-names of top secret projects where people were used under mind control experiments.
Do you feel like you're a victim of Project Monarch?
I don't know specifically. I was never told you are, part of Project Monarch. All I know is that a lot of what I experienced fits the profile of other people who had been identified as used in Project Monarch.
Where would they train you in, say, Project Monarch? Would you go to a particular school or to a house or to a...
I believe that once you are multiple personality disordered to a certain level and that you're in a network, like if you're in an intergenerational family, then they can use you to train you for more high-tech things. Like you can be taken, I was taken to military bases, and I was taken to Point Mugu, naval base in, I believe it's in Ventura, California, and was connected to high-tech equipment, and I believe that that's where these projects, I think that's what kind of defines if a person's in a project or not. It's the level of technology that you're used at, or that your mind is programmed.
And do you feel like when you were taken to Point Mugu, that you received some sort of mind control training that could be called Project Monarch?
I believe I was used that there was mind control programming, and I don't know what the name of the project was.
Would they have somebody stand up at the head of the class and say, okay, here's what you're going to do today, and there'd be 10 other kids there? Or what?
No, but there was programming and cross-programming and things that they'd put electrodes on your head and program. There would be times when they would do high-pitched frequency sounds. They would put one kind of sound in one ear and one kind of sound in the other ear, and it would drive you nuts. I mean, just high-pitched frequencies. And from what I'm understanding and learning more about this, is it's a way to take your conscious mind totally out of the picture when you're totally bombarded with all your senses, that you're able to, that your conscious mind just leaves, you dissociate, and that's when they're able to do deep programming on your subconscious mind. And that's when it's embedded deeply, and you're not supposed to be able to remember.
Do you have any knowledge about, after, say, these children were kidnapped or thrown in cars, other than the snuff film, do you have any knowledge about them being sold, say, for body parts or to go overseas or anything like that?
No, I don't have personal information on that. I have talked to other people who are very aware that is going on, but I didn't personally have experience with that.
Have you ever heard of the organization called the Finders?
No. I do know that there was programming that I was subjected to, I believed inside, not consciously, but subconsciously, I believed that I had a twin sister, and her name was Sharon, and I believed that she was separate from me, although she was just part of me. I was programmed along Disneyland themes. There was a movie that I watched called The Parent Trap that was about twins named Susan and Sharon, and I was programmed to think that I was like them, and I thought, I used to cry when I was first getting my memories because I wanted to know where my twin sister was, and I longed for her, and I cried, and I wanted her, and I felt she was in danger, and I didn't know where she was, And it wasn't until I was able to integrate that part of me, realize that Sharon was my twin sister and that she was one that was programmed to think that she was wealthy, that she had, extensive training, was very intelligent, was Catholic, and was used with a lot of the different people. So they're able to compartmentalize different people that you're used with and different capabilities by having the different personalities. And the Disney themes were used extensively. I had programs with Alice in Wonderland where they used the fantasy part of it, and the Wizard of Oz, where I was trained that when I went over the rainbow I would be into another world. It felt real but wasn't, and that that I would, every time I'd hear the word home, that there's no place like home, that I would
Like
associate
for the holidays?
No, there's no place like home. When Dorothy says there's no place like home in The Wizard of Oz,
Oh, yes.
it was associated to being back in my bed and to forgetting everything that had previously gone on with me during that night. I'd be picked up at the airport and my mother or father would say, "You can sleep all the way home." And that's all I needed to hear was the word home. And I was
Picked up at the airport by your parents?
Mhm.
Where would you fly in from?
LAX. Oh, where? Washington, D.C., New York, or everywhere. Lots of different places.
This is when you were given these assignments.
Mhm.
So your parents obviously knew what you were being used.
My mother was programmed. My mother, I know, I would stake my life on the fact that my mother is programmed, does not know. She doesn't. My mother would never consciously do any of this. My mother is a good person. She
What
would
about
never.
your father? Is he still alive?
My father was nuts. He was a multiple. When I was a little girl, yes, he's still alive. He's 85 years old. He's in a nursing home. When I started having all the memories, I, of course, reported him to Child Protective Services and gave an extensive report of everything I'd remembered, and it went nowhere. Although they did interview nieces and nephews and people that had contact with him, and obviously the children didn't remember anything because they'd probably all been abused in this way and consciously weren't able to remember to report it. But my father, I remember as a child, when I learned more about multiple personality disorder, when I studied it and got my bachelor's degree in psychology, and when I was able to study it, I realized that looking back, my dad used to say things like, when I was a little girl, or he made references to different personalities within himself all of the time. And he was always changeable. I mean, we'd go to one people's house and he'd, be Jewish, and we'd go to another people and he'd be, Catholic. And my father had a lot of different identities, and he was kind of charismatic, and a lot of people thought he was really funny, but he was severely disturbed. A severely disturbed individual.
What was his occupation?
He was a welder. He had a welding shop called Eckhart's Welding in West LA, and I believe that it was used as a front for pornography and prostitution. There was a lot of pictures sold out of there. I was taken there a lot. Robert Taylor, the actor, used to come visit my father there all the time. And my dad would come home and say, my friend Robert Taylor came by the shop today. And I don't know exactly what their relationship was, but it all fits together in the same network.
Well, if your dad's in a home, is the welding shop still owned by the family?
My brother Rick owns the welding shop.
And was his welding shop self-sustaining or self-supporting?
Yes, and I believe that, as I got to higher levels, the welding shops expanded. And I think there's like 6 or 8 of them now. Maybe there's 5 or 6
welding shops.
They're
all
called
over town?
Eckhart's Incorporated. And they're Thousand Oaks, Mission Hills, West LA, Oxnard. They're all over. And my family split apart. My brothers got in a big fight. No one would talk to anyone else. The whole family is estranged. My mother has very little contact with anyone.
Well, would these welding shops be able to support themselves, or do they use the pornography?
No, I think that there's a legitimate business going on of welding hitches and different welding jobs that also sustain the business.
So it was more than, it wasn't just a front then?
No.
How about guns? You ever see any exchange of money for guns or dope for
There,
guns?
I had memories of being taken out of the country, and we would go on vacations to places in Mexico where there would be at night transfers of munitions. And my father's uncle, his name was Charles Lilly Horn, and he wasn't actually my father's uncle, but I think he was like a distant cousin. But he was the owner of Federal Cartage Company, which they manufactured munitions, and we called him Uncle Charlie. He was
in L.A.?
No, he lived in I believe he lived in Omaha, and he lived in Scottsdale, Arizona part of the year. But he wore a suit all the time. He always had a carnation in his lapel. He was a multimillionaire, and I believe that his money was made through the munitions and the selling of guns. I think it was a big business. I think that they knew that. That's what funded a lot of stuff that they needed money for.
You mean like the pornography?
I really don't know. All I know is that my Uncle Charles was involved in munitions. Federal Cartage.
What year would this have been?
The late 60s, early 70s.
Is he still alive?
No. And then he was affiliated with, I'm not sure if he owned it or was affiliated with Olin Foundation, and I don't know what all they're involved in, but I believe that he was involved with the higher level of this whole network too.
Not above the politicians, though.
I don't know.
How about aliens and the UFOs?
When I first started having memories, I believed I was a Martian. I had massive migraine headaches. I thought I was a Martian. I thought my mission was to help escort people to other planets, should we have a crisis on the Earth. I think that I believe that it was a cover program that was used to make me appear like I was absolutely insane to people. Should I start remembering and reporting this, it was like a layer where I would report this and it would discredit anything that I would say later. But I remember thinking that I was hearing about the aliens, the Martians were talking to me, and I also believe that it was a perfect cover for the ritual abuse, where missing time is related, that the thinking that I was abducted and missing time, and that someone was, taking children. I had fetuses that were aborted when I was a teenager that they used in rituals, and it was an easy thing to blame it on an alien. And then, how would anyone ever? There's no one to point the finger at if it's some alien civilization. And I'm not saying that there might not be, but I just know that it was very real human people who were doing the abuse to me, not aliens. And the reason I was missing time wasn't because I was taken in a UFO. It was because I was being taken in helicopters, and they would tell. I would think that I was being abducted in a UFO when I was in a helicopter. And it was just the perfect cover to make it seem like something that was absolutely unbelievable. And there would be no accountability, of course, to it. How are you going to catch an alien in a spaceship?
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like you've actually seen a spaceship or been inside a spaceship?
I thought I had, but I believe I was inside helicopters and airplanes.
Are there any other areas that you want to discuss tonight?
I feel really tired. I think that that it's important for people to know that this is going on. The reason that I risk my life in telling is because I want safety and protection for my children. I want this to stop for other children. I want people to know. I want good people to do something, to know, so that this stops. Their plan is protected by the sheer incredulity of the story. I believe that the story sounds incredulous. It sounds absolutely impossible, but I believe that that's the way that they orchestrated it in order to pull this whole thing off. And I think that if people don't believe that they should research it, to be curious enough to try to find out, to learn, to read, and to open their minds a little bit to the possibility that this could be going on, and that children are being ritually abused, not as some weird religion or some crazy people, but as a conditioning for mind control, so that these children can be used as an unpaid slave labor force. And I think there is a God, and God will see us through to exposing this to get help for children.
Now your book again is called Starshine.
Right.
By Brice Taylor.
Brice Taylor.
Where would somebody obtain a copy of this book?
By writing to the Brice Taylor Trust at P.O. Box 2474, Carbondale, Illinois 62902.
And is there anything else you'd like to mention on the occasion of this interview? Have we covered everything you think that's significant, at least at this time? We didn't go into a lot of detail about your mind control program and exactly what they did. You can spend hours just on
hours. I mean, there is so much.
Right.
Obviously, I was used for so many years in so many different places, and it's a lot. So.
Well, but under the circumstances, I thought it'd be a good idea to at least cover the high points on this occasion, and later on, if we have an opportunity, we can go into more details about how they used mind control, how they trained you, and how the multiple personalities work and so forth.
And I've documented a lot of this information, and it's been sent out so that it's in the hands of people that would go public with it should anything happen to me or my children or to Tom. So.
And Tom being?
My boyfriend.
Your boyfriend. Okay. Okay. Well, guys, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ted. I really appreciate everything you're doing, putting yourself out there and really helping the kids. And
well, it's something I have to do, just like you have to do it.
God bless you.
Okay, good. Thanks a lot.
Yep.
Thanks.